Hello? My name is Zephyra, and I wasn't supposed to be seen. At my sister's MBA graduation, she looked me straight in the eye, then humiliated me in front of hundreds of strangers. Why? Because I was wearing my Waitress uniform. But what she didn't know was that I was also her professor. That wasn't the worst part. The real pain? Years of being cropped out of family photos, a gift I gave her, left unopened, a resume where she claimed my company as hers. And yet, no one ever asked my side of the story. So what really happened that day when the dean took the stage? What made her smile disappear? And why did she never speak my name again? The spring air in Asheville felt kinder than I remembered, yet every step I took onto that polished university quad made my skin prickle like I didn't belong. I could hear the ceremony announcer's voice in the distance, formal, rehearsed, celebratory, the kind of voice that wraps success in gold foil. I tightened my grip on the small blue gift bag in my hand, the cellophane crinkling against my palm. It held a simple silver pendant I saved up for, nestled next to a handwritten card I'd rewritten 3 times. My black work shoes clacked against the concrete path, still scuffed with flour from the diner kitchen. I'd just come off a double shift, no time to shower, change, or even fix the stray curls that had escaped my ponytail. I probably still smelled like bacon grease and stale coffee. It didn't matter. I told myself that over and over. What mattered was that I showed up, for her, Isolde, my older sister, the one this whole day revolved around. I followed the signs toward the auditorium, where families huddled in tight photo clusters, dads straightening ties, moms blotting lip gloss, siblings holding congratulatory balloons. I skirted around the edge, hoping to slip in unnoticed. The usher barely looked at me as he glanced at my printout. He pointed toward the far left aisle with the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Family overflow. You'll be over there, past the restrooms," he mumbled. "Thanks," I said, though my voice barely registered above the rustle of programs and distant organ music. My seat was tucked into a corner where the scent of disinfectant from the nearby bathrooms mixed with floral perfume and cheap cologne. Not one nameplate marked "Family of Graduate," just a row of fold-out chairs, tight and utilitarian. I sank into mine, pressing the gift bag into my lap, and fixed my gaze on the stage. She hadn't seen me yet. That gave me a moment. I tried to remind myself this wasn't about me. It never had been. Growing up, Isolde had always been the center of gravity in our house. She didn't demand attention. She simply absorbed it, like a black hole, quiet and massive. When she spoke, everyone listened. When she entered a room, conversation adjusted to orbit around her. She won spelling bees, student government elections, tennis tournaments. And when she did, Mom baked pies and Dad made speeches. I remember the time I placed 3rd in a middle school poetry contest. I brought home the certificate, shy but proud. Isolde was out back practicing her valedictorian speech. I laid the paper on the table. No one said a word. I shook the memory off just as the audience burst into applause. The names were being called. One after another, the graduates crossed the stage in their navy blue robes and gold tassels, shaking hands and posing for photos. I scanned the crowd, locating her easily. She stood with perfect posture, a glossy smile, her hair in a sculpted chignon that probably took a salon an hour to perfect. Then her name was called. Isolde Marin Brooks, MBA with distinction. The applause rose like a wave cresting. She strode forward, chin high, elegance in every step. I clapped too. I meant it. For all her flaws, she worked hard. Maybe this time she'd meet me halfway. Maybe. The dean handed her the diploma, said something that made her laugh, too loud, too rehearsed. She took the podium next. My hands tensed. This was unexpected. Only a handful of top students gave speeches. She began, thanking the faculty, administration, her mentors. She acknowledged classmates with inside jokes that made the front rows chuckle. She thanked our parents, by name, and paused for a smile toward their section. And finally, she said, glancing into the dimmed rear rows where I sat, "I'd like to thank someone who taught me a very important lesson." I blinked. Was she? "My little sister," she said, lips curling in that knowing smile. "Thank you for showing me what happens when you don't push yourself." A few heads turned. A woman near me let out a surprised gasp. No matter where you start, Isolde continued, you don't have to stay waiting tables forever. The laughter started small. A man 2 seats down actually snorted. My cheeks burned as if I'd been slapped in front of a room full of strangers. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. A camera swung past me, capturing reactions. A flash blinded my periphery for a second. I clenched the gift bag tighter, knuckles whitening. My name wasn't mentioned. My job was, and that's what she chose to spotlight. Not that I showed up, not that I'd worked double shifts this week just to be here on time, just that I waited tables. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. I kept my face still. I didn't cry. I didn't look around. I stared straight ahead and told myself over and over that this wasn't new. She'd done it 100 times before, just never with a mic and a captive audience. The applause rolled on. Her speech ended. People stood. I remained seated. Breathe, Zephyra. My hands rested on my thighs now, the gift bag between my feet. The applause around me dimmed, but inside, everything screamed. I focused on the shine of the floor tiles, the way the bouquet arrangements flanked the stage in perfect symmetry. The woman next to me leaned toward her husband and whispered, "Was that her sister?" I kept still. The ceremony wrapped up. Graduates were ushered down the center aisle, mortarboards cocked at fashionable angles, families surged forward. The crowd moved as one churning body toward the courtyard outside. I sat in my corner. I watched the stage empty. One by one, the seats around me cleared. Eventually, I stood. The hallway buzzed with chatter. Balloons bobbed. Someone popped a champagne bottle in a corner, drawing shrieks of laughter. I walked the opposite direction, gift bag in hand, toward the side exit. Before I stepped out, I passed a monitor streaming the ceremony's live stream. The video replayed her speech. The frame paused, mid-laughter, capturing her with her mouth open, basking in the audience's reaction. And there, in the lower right-hand corner of the screen, was me, seated alone near the restrooms. A small caption hovered above my head. Zephyra, server lead, the Blue Lantern Diner. I didn't rush to stand. People clapped, cheered, hugged, took selfies. I stayed rooted in that plastic chair like my shoes had been nailed to the floor. Around me, the air had shifted, brighter, filled with congratulations and distant laughter. But all I could hear was that single line from her speech playing on loop in my mind. You don't have to stay waiting tables forever. It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. The timing. The smirk. Like I was her cautionary tale in front of hundreds of people, most of whom didn't even know my name. And now, thanks to her, if they remembered me at all, I'd just be the waitress sister. The example of what not to become. Rows started clearing, caps came off. Families waved, clapped each other on the back, held up signs. I felt invisible, and yet oddly exposed, like I was the only one still seated while the world moved on without me. A janitor passed by, pushing a cleaning cart. He gave me an awkward smile and said, "They'll need this aisle cleared soon, ma'am." I nodded, stood slowly, and grabbed the gift bag that now felt heavier than it had earlier. I hadn't decided whether I'd give it to her yet. Part of me still clung to the naive idea that she might hug me, thank me for showing up, maybe even apologize for that dig on stage. But as I watched her, surrounded by smiling professors and classmates, posing for camera flashes, I knew better. I began making my way to the exit when a ripple of music interrupted the flow of the crowd. The lights dimmed again, and the screen above the stage lit up. Moments through the years. A slideshow. I stayed. Something told me to. Photos of Isolde's childhood flashed by. Her playing piano at 5. Her winning the county debate competition. Her in a Halloween princess costume. Birthday cakes, vacation shots, every big moment stitched together like a montage from a movie. And I waited to see myself in one, just one, a joint birthday maybe, a holiday photo, anything, but I wasn't there, not even once. One picture showed her blowing out candles at what I remembered was her 12th birthday. I had sat beside her that day, grinning, missing a front tooth. But in the photo now, the frame was cropped, tight, just Isolde and the cake. The next slide had bold text across it. Family, my foundation. A few people around me murmured things like, beautiful, and wow, so lucky. Someone leaned over to whisper, I didn't know she had a sister. I stood motionless, unsure if my face was betraying how that sentence felt like a dagger under my ribs. I was there for all those memories. I handed her tissues after piano recitals when she thought she messed up. I helped Mom sew the sash on that Halloween costume. I was in the background holding balloons, clapping, clearing plates. But somehow, in this version of the story, her version, I simply didn't exist. They didn't forget me. They deleted me. I started walking again, each step harder than the last. I passed the bouquet tables, the congratulatory banners, the smiling faces. I didn't make eye contact, not out of shame, but because I knew if I did, the tears pressing against my throat might slip out. Outside, the campus courtyard was blooming with people. Literally, tulips lined the walkways, and proud parents had arms full of bouquets. Isolde stood by the main fountain, laughing too hard at something a man in a blazer said. She held a glass of champagne in one hand, her phone in the other, probably scanning photos already posted. I was maybe 10 feet away when a family friend, Mrs. Harlow, I think, stepped up to her with a smile. "Oh, Isolde, is that your cousin over there?" she asked, motioning toward me. Isolde glanced up. Her eyes met mine for a second. Then she turned back to the woman with a laugh, casual and cruel. "No," she said. Just a local waitress who showed up to be supportive. My jaw didn't drop. I didn't gasp. My chest didn't seize up. I just stood there, numb. It wasn't new. The way she stripped me of identity in public was something I'd seen before, but never so cleanly, so intentionally. I nodded at Mrs. Harlow as I passed them. "Have a nice day," I said quietly, and kept walking. She turned, flustered. Oh dear, I didn't realize." I waved it off. I wasn't about to make a scene. I never did. I walked past the photo booth line where families in color-coordinated outfits laughed and posed. Fathers lifted kids onto their shoulders. Mothers fixed curls and straightened ties. I held my gift bag a little tighter and kept going. Down the sidewalk, across the lawn, past the donut truck and the student jazz band playing near the administration building. It was all so joyful, but none of it was mine. I made it to the parking lot and leaned against my old sedan. I didn't unlock the door right away. I just stood there, taking in the sting of everything. The way I'd been placed near the restroom, the way I'd been cropped out of her life, the way I was rebranded in front of strangers as just a local waitress. I wasn't mad anymore. I was awake. Because here's what most people don't realize. Silence doesn't mean surrender. But this wasn't accidental. This wasn't a slip of the tongue or a joke taken too far. She didn't erase me by accident. It was the plan all along. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the streetlights were already casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The sun had dipped low behind the trees, and everything looked softer in the haze of twilight. I sat in the driver's seat for a while, engine off, fingers still curled loosely around the steering wheel. The graduation gift bag sat on the passenger seat, untouched, just like I'd left it this morning. So did the necklace box and the handwritten card I'd carefully tucked inside. I'd gone through 3 drafts of that card, spent $20 I really didn't have on that chain, simple but elegant, something she could wear in meetings or interviews. I thought maybe she'd smile when she opened it, maybe she'd see me differently. Foolish hope, that's all it was, and she never even opened the door to let it happen. I finally pushed the door open, grabbed the gift bag, and climbed the steps to my tiny apartment. The quiet greeted me like a familiar friend. No voices, no congratulations, no one asking how it went. Just the usual hum of my fridge, the faint creak of old wood beneath my shoes. I kicked off my flats, dropped the bag on the kitchen counter, and shrugged out of the waitress apron I'd worn all morning. There was a faint coffee stain near the hem I hadn't noticed before. I didn't bother changing out of the rest of my clothes. The air inside was still and cool, the kind that wrapped around your bones. I didn't flip on the overhead light, just the warm lamp by the couch, casting a soft amber glow across the cluttered room. I looked at the cactus in the window. It had been there for years, a gift from my grandmother, the last one before she passed. Still alive, still green, still no bloom. Oh, stubborn little thing, I muttered, walking over to it. I pressed a finger to the soil, dry as usual. I watered it regularly, not too much, just like Grandma had said. But it had never once bloomed, not even a bud. I couldn't help but feel like it mirrored me in some way, still standing, still growing, but never quite flowering the way people expected. Or maybe just not in a way they cared to notice. I dropped my keys on the counter and reached for my phone, checking for new notifications. A couple messages from coworkers about shift swaps. One junk email from a store I didn't remember signing up for. And one sent this morning at 9:04 a.m. from me to Isolde. So proud of you, Isolde. If you need anything, I'll be there. Congrats. Below it, in small gray font, read. That was it. No heart reaction, no thank you, no message back. Just read, absorbed, ignored. I stared at it for a long while, not because I expected it to change, but because I needed to let it register, needed to feel it fully so I wouldn't let it rot inside me later. It wasn't the first time she'd ignored me, it wouldn't be the last. But there was something different now, something sharper. I scrolled further back in our thread. Years ago, I'd sent her a photo of my first decent tip night. 2 $50 bills lined neatly on the counter, still warm from a customer's wallet. I remember feeling proud, not because of the money, but because it meant I was doing something right. People trusted me, came back to my section, asked for me by name. Her reply had come 2 hours later. Cute. Everyone starts somewhere, I guess. I'd read that message a dozen times that night. At first, I thought it was her awkward way of being supportive. But now, with the distance and clarity time brings, I realized it was the same tone she always used when talking about me. Condescending under the guise of being kind. Everyone starts somewhere, I echoed under my breath. Some of us just don't get permission to keep going. I looked into the mirror that hung by the hallway. My reflection looked tired, my eyes rimmed with the kind of red you get from swallowing too much emotion. But I also looked grounded, older, like someone who had finally stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. I reached for the gift bag again, slid the pendant box out, and opened it slowly. The necklace still lay in its velvet nest, shining gently under the lamp's light. I didn't cry, I just stared at it, then at myself. Then I snapped a photo. Not for memories, for record. That morning, I'd left the bag in her car, unlocked as always. Front seat, clearly visible. I'd taken a quick picture after placing it there, not because I expected anything to go wrong, but because I was proud of the gesture. It had taken something from me. Time, money, energy, hope. Now, as I looked at the photo again on my phone, I realized she never mentioned the gift, never asked about it, never opened it. I set the box back down and walked toward the bookshelf near my desk. It was filled with textbooks, accounting principles, business strategy, market forecasting. The spines were worn, pages marked with highlighters. I hadn't just been working as a waitress these past few years. I'd been studying, learning, building. I reached for the bottom shelf and pulled out a leather binder, the kind that snapped shut with a magnetic clasp. Inside were printed emails, course transcripts, and project notes. My MBA certificate, signed and sealed, was tucked neatly in the front pocket. Behind it, a stack of evaluations from students, glowing with words like inspiring, clear, practical. I walked over to my laptop, opened it, and clicked into the folder labeled N. Gray, Projects Approved. My professional alias, one I kept carefully separate from the rest of my life. Inside that folder was everything Isolde didn't know about me, everything she had dismissed before ever giving me a chance. Emails from other faculty members, speaking requests, course development invitations. The latest document was a formal PDF titled Guest Speaker Invitation, Asheville Business School, Professor N. Gray. I stared at it for a long moment. She had no idea I'd been invited to speak at the same school she had just walked across the stage from, that I had taught students who now wore caps and gowns because of the quiet mentorship I'd offered. I closed the folder, leaned back in my chair, and looked at the cactus one more time. "You're not ready yet, huh?" I whispered. It didn't answer, of course, but I didn't need it to. because I finally understood something. She thought I stayed small because I had no choice. The truth was, I stayed quiet on purpose. Morning sunlight filtered through the blinds in narrow slats, striping my apartment walls like prison bars. I was already up, couldn't sleep much the night before. After I closed that file on my laptop, I just sat there for hours, letting the silence seep into my skin. Not out of sadness, not anymore. Something else had settled in me, something sharp and clean. By the time the coffee pot gurgled its last drop, I had showered, dressed in my neutral gray slacks and blazer, and packed my bag. The air smelled of fresh linen and caffeine. I pulled my hair into a tight, deliberate ponytail and slipped on the shoes I reserved for her world, the world where people called me professor. Driving across town to the consulting office always felt like switching lives. That stretch of Mapleton Avenue, with its old stone buildings and too many stoplights, was a corridor between identities. On one side, Zafira Brooks, server at the Blue Lantern. On the other, Professor N. Gray, strategist and consultant. No one in either world had ever successfully put the two together, and I had worked hard to keep it that way. I parked in the reserved lot behind our firm's shared space, waved at the security guard who always gave me a knowing nod, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The small reception area was already buzzing. "Good morning, Professor," my receptionist greeted without missing a beat, handing me a manila folder as she spoke on the phone. I nodded. "Thanks, Gina." I stepped into my office, a quiet corner room with one glass wall and one whiteboard crammed with diagrams, post-it notes, and acronyms. The desk was cluttered, but intentionally so. I liked keeping my projects within arm's reach, reminders that I wasn't just building companies, I was rebuilding myself. I opened the folder, new applications for our leadership cohort, potential hires, internal assessments. One name stopped me cold: Isolde Marin Brooks. It didn't hit like a punch. It didn't even surprise me. It just confirmed what I already suspected. The universe had a wicked sense of timing. She'd applied for a position as a strategic development consultant with one of our affiliate firms I advised directly. The resume was polished, even impressive to the untrained eye. But what made me pause wasn't her academic credentials. It was the line near the bottom. Co-founder, Zenith Growth Advisors. My company, my brand, my sweat. I read it twice, then again, then leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling like the drywall might explain what kind of person takes credit for a legacy she didn't lift a finger to build. I picked up the phone and called our in-house counsel. "Dina," I said calmly, "mark a note in the integrity folder. Possible misrepresentation on an application. I'll send you a copy." "Got it," she replied. "Want me to flag it with HR now?" "Not yet," I said. "Let's see what else comes in." I ended the call and clicked over to my email, mostly out of habit. That's when I saw it. Subject line: Gray's curriculum is a joke. No preview text, no greeting, just a file attached. From Isolde M. Brooks to zlinell@grayconsulting.org. I sat there for a second, reading the from and to fields over and over. She hadn't realized the email address she'd autofilled was mine. Of course, she hadn't. She'd meant to send it to someone else, likely another applicant or colleague. But it had landed squarely in my inbox. I didn't open the attachment right away. I didn't need to. I could already imagine the contents. Something about my lecture structure, the simplicity of my language, the non-traditional case studies I used. I'd heard it all before, just not in such a conveniently packaged confession. I clicked forward. To Gina, assistant. Subject: keep for record message. Add this to the Brooks file. I closed the window and stared out the glass wall. So this was how it was going to play. I wasn't angry. In fact, there was a strange calm settling in. I finally saw her clearly, not just as my sister, but as someone who had built her success on borrowed confidence and other people's silence. She needed to be the star, the favorite, the one they all pointed to and said, "Look at what she's become." She couldn't bear the idea that I had done more, quietly, steadily, on my own terms, and now she was trying to co-opt that, too. I opened my notes folder, the one labeled Strategic Competency Evaluations. Each applicant to our program was required to submit a video response to scenario-based challenges. I scanned the list until I found hers. There she was. I clicked play. The video loaded, and there she was in her spotless white blouse, hair down in calculated waves, smiling into the camera. "Hi, I'm Isolde Brooks," she began, polished as ever. "I'm passionate about scalable impact and sustainable business strategy." The rest of the pitch rolled out like a memorized TED Talk. Buzzwords stacked on buzzwords. Every line felt like it had been scrubbed of imperfection. Then came the scenario section. How would you lead a team in a merger between two conflicting organizations with opposing cultures? She didn't hesitate. "Well, I believe in setting the tone from the top," she began. "I'd take charge immediately, establish boundaries, and direct each department head individually. There's no room for too many cooks in the kitchen. No mention of listening. No collaboration. Just control." I paused the video. I remembered the class debate from last year, one of my online MBA lectures where students discussed hierarchical versus decentralized leadership. A Professor Gray had facilitated. I remembered her screen name, remembered her tone. She had interrupted classmates, spoken over the quiet ones, insisted her way was efficient. She never knew who was behind the camera. I closed the video window and leaned back, exhaling slowly. No more hiding, no more letting things slide. I reached for the assessment sheet and began writing. Candidate demonstrates confidence and fluency in leadership vocabulary, but lacks depth in team empathy and conflict resolution strategy. Over-relies on top-down directives. Limited adaptability shown in situational judgment. Application to proceed with caution. I signed it. Professor N. Gray. Then I opened a blank document titled Candidate Review. Strategic Role. Isolde Marin Brooks. I stared at her name for a moment, then whispered, "Let's test how she handles real strategy." The restaurant was the kind of place you went to when you wanted to prove something. The white linen napkins, the low, warm lighting, the heavy silverware that felt too grand for a plate of chicken. It was the kind of place where servers wore black vests and didn't introduce themselves with names. Just your server. It was also the kind of place Isolde chose when she wanted the room to fit her image. 1 week had passed since the graduation. The invitation to dinner came in a group text sent by my mother. "Celebrating our Isolde. Family dinner this Friday, 7 p.m. Dress nice." She hadn't added my name separately, just family. I sat near the end of the table, angled slightly toward the wall. There were 14 of us, parents, cousins, a couple of family friends. Isolde sat dead center, directly across from our father, her white dress practically glowing against the rich mahogany of the booth. She laughed loudly, hands animated. If you didn't know her, you'd think she was genuinely joyful. If you did know her, you'd recognize the calculated spark in her eyes. She was holding court, and like always, everyone followed her lead. Mom beamed whenever someone toasted Isolde. Dad raised his glass dutifully, though his eyes were glassy by the third round of wine. Even our cousin Diane, who rarely left the suburbs unless bribed with free food, leaned in to compliment Isolde's tenacity. I picked at my salmon. The edges were going cold. I hadn't touched the wine. "So, Zephira," my mother chimed, forcing her tone into a practiced lightness. "How's the diner?" There it was. Before I could answer, Isolde waved a hand like she was brushing lint off her sleeve. "Mom, don't ask her about that. Let her enjoy the night without talking about shift rotations and refills." The table chuckled. Someone coughed to hide it. I laid my fork down and looked straight at her. "You keep talking about where I work," I said calmly, evenly. "One day, you'll realize where I lead." The table fell silent. Even the clinking of glass seemed to pause. Isolde didn't answer. She just blinked once, as if trying to compute what I'd said. Then she gave the smallest shrug and reached for her water. Mom fidgeted with the edge of her napkin. Diane looked at her plate. Our Uncle Harold cleared his throat and changed the subject to a new local sports bar. The moment passed like someone had flipped a page too quickly, but I stayed still, letting the weight of my words hang in the air long enough to land. After dessert, we began to trickle out into the foyer. I waited near the coat rack while others hugged and said their goodbyes. That's when it happened. A young woman, maybe 24, approached me, wide-eyed and nervous. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Professor Gray?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Yes?" Her smile widened with relief. "I thought so. I took your online class last year. Your work changed everything for me. You made business feel human." I was still trying to find words when she reached out and hugged me. "Thank you for believing in me." As she walked away, I noticed Isolde had stopped mid-step near the valet. She'd heard. Her face didn't twist or rage. She simply froze for just a second, like her grip on the reality she'd built cracked a little under her heels. I didn't chase that moment. I didn't even let myself feel victorious. I just pulled on my coat and left. Back home, hours later, the glow of the streetlights was soft against the blinds. I had just made tea when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "Hello?" A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard over a phone in nearly a decade. "Zeph?" I didn't respond right away. "It's Dad," he said, as if I wouldn't recognize the slow gravel of his voice. I just wanted to check in. You okay?" Silence hung between us, not awkward, not heavy, just full. "I am," I said. "I'm okay, Dad. Finally." He didn't say anything more. Neither did I. But for once, that was enough. After the call, I opened my laptop. My inbox had a few unread messages, most of them administrative. One from HR at the partner firm I'd forwarded Isolde's resume to. One from my assistant confirming the upcoming panel. I hovered over the one I'd drafted the day before. Subject line, Integrity Disclosure. I reread it once more. Nothing dramatic, no slander, just facts. A bullet point list of inaccuracies, misrepresented job titles, instances of impersonation. My cursor hovered over send. I pressed it. No flourish, no fanfare. Just forward motion. Then I closed the lid and whispered, "No more silence." 2 days after the dinner, I walked into the boardroom on the 8th floor of Kensington Tower with my coffee in one hand and a thick manila folder in the other. The building had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Asheville's skyline, modest but dignified, like the people who quietly built this city over decades. I had a full review docket that day, part of a routine vetting process for incoming strategic applicants to our partner organizations. As a senior advisor and external evaluator, I was often brought in for what people politely called high-stakes decisions. But I already knew this wasn't going to be routine. I placed the folder on the conference table, the name on the cover staring back at me like a dare. Top candidate, strategic lead, Isolde Marin Brooks. I took a long sip of coffee, my heartbeat steady. Then I opened the folder. The first page was her resume. I'd seen dozens like it, crafted to impress at a glance. The layout was sleek, the language sharp. Buzzwords dotted each section. Scalable solutions, cross-functional synergy, visionary growth execution. I skimmed until my eyes landed on the line I knew would be there. Co-founder, Zenith Growth Advisors. There it was, a lie in 12-point font. I leaned back, closed the folder, and stared at the polished ceiling for a beat. I didn't need to react. The truth would do that for me. I pulled up my secure drive and opened the incorporation files. I knew exactly where they were. The LLC formation documents, the IRS confirmation, the operating agreement. My name was the only one listed, no partners, no board. Just me, and a P.O. box I paid for out of tip money 5 years ago. I remembered filing those papers after a double shift at the diner, sitting in my car with a $1 menu burger in one hand and my laptop balanced on the steering wheel. I was exhausted, sweaty, and broke, but I was building something, and I was doing it alone. I printed the legal doc and clipped it behind her resume. Then I moved on to her interview submission, a recorded video sent in as part of the process. I clicked play and watched the screen fill with her face. She looked poised, confident, that fake easy charm she had honed since middle school. Her hair was curled just enough to seem effortless, her blazer bright against a crisp white backdrop. "Good morning," she began, flashing a grin. "I'm Isolde Brooks, and I believe leadership is about vision, accountability, and decisive execution." I wrote down, well-rehearsed, smooth open. She launched into her case study response, a hypothetical merger between two competing firms with clashing cultures. She dove in, rattling off solutions like she was pitching to Shark Tank. "I would assert control from the start," she said, smiling like she was doing the world a favor. "Bring department heads into alignment, make clear who's running the show." I paused the video. No mention of dialogue, no emphasis on team dynamics, just top-down direction. I added another note. "Dominates conversation, no inclusion strategy mentioned." I let the video run again. As she answered follow-up questions, she interrupted herself twice to correct phrasing. She didn't reference a single piece of data. At one point, she used the phrase, "get them in line," to describe how she'd deal with dissenting opinions. Her tone was smooth, but it was all show. I minimized the video and opened the assessment form. It wasn't personal, it was professional. And she wasn't qualified. Candidate exhibits high surface-level confidence and presentation polish. However, depth of insight into adaptive leadership strategies is lacking. Fails to demonstrate team inclusivity or conflict resolution awareness. Relies on control-based methods over collaborative solutions. I filled in the rest, signed the bottom. Evaluator, N. Gray. It wasn't until I was closing out the file that I heard the low knock on my office door. "Come in," I said. It was Frances, the board liaison. She stepped in quietly, holding a small stack of applications. "Just dropped off the rest," she said. "Oh, by the way, word's getting around about Isolde. Her file's been reviewed by 3 firms so far. They're all passing." I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Frances tilted her head slightly. "Someone mentioned she claimed she co-founded Zenith with you." "She did," I said flatly. Frances raised her brows. "That didn't seem smart." "It wasn't," I said. "And it's documented." She smirked. "Well, the board will trust your word on this. Just say the word if we need to flag it." "I already did," I said. "Files noted. Let the record hold." When she left, I sat in silence for a moment, not because I felt guilt or hesitation, but because I understood the finality of what I'd done. She had tried to step into a world she didn't earn. She had walked into rooms I built, claiming the walls as her own, and now those rooms had turned her away. Later that night, I walked into my apartment and turned on the hallway light. The cactus was still there, green and stubborn, perched near the window, still no bloom, still waiting. I passed it without touching it, dropped my keys on the entry table, and opened my laptop. I composed a memo, internal, confidential, filed under compliance. Subject, Candidate Claim Review, Isolde E.M. Brooks, content, misrepresented experience, claimed co-founding status on entity legally and solely registered under Z. Lionel. Recommendation, red flag in candidate records for future reference. I clicked send. Then I sat back in my chair, the room still and calm. The kind of calm you only find after choosing to stop letting someone rewrite your story. It didn't take long after the rejection for the whispers to start. I hadn't said a word publicly. There was no press release, no pointed memo. But in the circles that mattered, the ones that decided who got the next job, the next seat at the table, word always traveled faster than truth. Or maybe in this case, they were finally the same thing. The invitation arrived in a thick white envelope with gold foil edges. Asheville Business School Annual Alumni Networking Gala. Formal attire required. I hadn't attended in years. Not because I wasn't invited, but because it never felt like the room had a place for someone like me. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just on the guest list, I was the keynote speaker. I arrived just past 7, stepping out of a rideshare into the soft glow of street lamps that lit the school's updated main hall. A valet reached for the door. I gave him a polite nod and gathered my coat around me. The air was crisp, not cold, and I welcomed it. It grounded me. My outfit was simple. Black suit, low heels, hair pinned back in a clean twist. Nothing loud, just precise. Inside, the lobby buzzed. Laughter echoed off the marble walls. A string quartet played softly from the back corner. Faculty mingled with corporate sponsors. Alumni posed for photos in front of a gold backdrop stamped with the school's logo. And there she was. Isolde. She stood near the hors d'oeuvres table in a deep green dress, surrounded by a small cluster of former classmates and two younger men who looked more like interns than peers. Her laugh, too sharp, too high, cut through the room like a chime that had been struck too hard. I caught her eye for only a second. She blinked, then smiled. Not the warm kind, the kind of smile you give before pulling a curtain to hide a mess. But I didn't flinch. I walked past her without acknowledgement, my heels clicking across the polished floor until I reached the front desk. A student volunteer checked my name off the list and guided me toward the ballroom entrance. A placard with my name rested on the head table. Professor Zephyra Brooks. The room was just beginning to fill. Round tables, white linens, wine already being poured. I spotted Dean Wexler by the stage, scanning the crowd. When he saw me, he smiled and walked over, extending his hand. "Professor," he said, his voice low and genuine. "We're honored you accepted." "Thank you for asking," I replied, my tone even. "Everyone's eager to hear what you have to say," he said, motioning toward the microphone. "We'll begin shortly." 20 minutes later, the lights dimmed. Conversations lowered to murmurs. A hush rolled through the room like a passing breeze. Dean Wexler took the stage. "Good evening, everyone," he began. "It's always a joy to welcome our alumni home. Tonight, however, isn't just about looking back. It's about honoring growth, grit, and the power of steady resolve." He paused. "In a world that values flash and noise, sometimes the real work happens in the quiet. Please join me in welcoming someone who represents that truth, a woman who has shaped minds, built companies, and never asked for applause." He smiled as he turned to face the side stage. Professor Zephyra Brooks. The room went completely still. For one long breath, no one clapped. They were too surprised. And then, slowly at first, applause began to build. I stepped onto the stage, spotlight soft, the podium cool under my hands. I didn't search the crowd for her. I didn't need to. I knew exactly where Isolde was sitting, just off center, right where people would see her reactions. I didn't speak her name. I didn't need to. "My journey," I began, "didn't start in lecture halls or boardrooms. It began during graveyard shifts and $2 tips. It began when I realized nobody was going to hand me a microphone, and that was okay." A few people in the back chuckled, but I stayed steady. There was a time when I was told I wasn't meant for much, that I should stick to what I'm good at, as if kindness, patience, and work ethic were less valuable than titles. I paused, letting the words land. I used to believe that if I stayed small, I could avoid judgment. But staying small doesn't protect you. It just makes you easier to step over. There were nods, subtle ones. A few people leaned forward in their seats. I didn't come here to make anyone uncomfortable, but I also didn't come to stay silent. I ended with a line I hadn't rehearsed, but one that felt stitched into my bones. Power doesn't need a microphone. Truth carries its own sound. The applause was different this time. It didn't start politely. It erupted. I didn't bask in it. I nodded once and stepped down. From the corner of my eye, I saw her. Isolde. Stone still. Her smile, frozen. Her glass, unlifted. People were whispering now, not in cruel tones, just facts being passed like trading cards. Wasn't that her sister? She said she co-founded that firm. I heard she lied on her resume. And just like that, the image she had so carefully built began to crack. Her circle shifted. One of the interns took a sudden interest in the dessert table. A colleague adjusted his seat to face another direction. Even the woman she had spent the last hour charming now seemed suddenly fascinated by her phone. Isolde stood. Not quickly, not dramatically, just enough to be seen. Then she walked toward the back, leaving her plate untouched. No goodbyes, no excuse, just gone. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Dean Wexler approached again, clapping once against my arm. That, he said, was exactly what this place needed to hear. I thanked him and stepped aside. I wasn't looking for redemption, only truth. The room moved around me. Conversations shifted, resumes traded, names remembered. but I stood still for a moment, letting the quiet settle in my chest, like the first time you realize your voice doesn't need volume to carry weight. I turned toward the exit, pausing only once to glance back. No smirk, no satisfaction, just a quiet sigh. Finally, closure. The morning after the gala, the air outside was still, as if even the breeze had paused to acknowledge the shift. Something had changed. Not loudly, not with fireworks or breakdowns, but with the kind of clarity that arrives after a long, muddy road finally flattens out. I parked in the usual spot behind the strategy building at Asheville Business School. This time, I didn't scan for empty spaces like I used to. My space was marked now, my name engraved on a small silver plaque above the asphalt, reserved for Professor Zephira Brooks. I walked past the main auditorium, where not long ago I had sat tucked away near the restroom, my uniform wrinkled, my gift bag unopened. Now, a banner flapped gently in the breeze beside the door. Spring Panel Series, featuring Professor Zephira Brooks. I didn't linger. I had a small meeting with students in 20 minutes. Inside, everything felt familiar and unfamiliar all at once. The same polished floors, the same buzzing of fluorescent lights, the same posters on the corkboard near the faculty lounge. But this time, people looked at me with recognition, not speculation. A few students nodded as they passed. One even said, "Good morning, Professor." I made my way to the mailroom to check my faculty box, expecting nothing more than department memos and maybe a student thank you note. Instead, sitting right on top was a small, cream-colored envelope with no printed return address. Just my name, in handwriting I didn't recognize. I paused for a moment before sliding my finger under the flap and pulling out a folded sheet of paper. It was from Mina Tran, my first mentee, the first student who ever stayed after class, too nervous to speak in front of the group but brave enough to ask for help. I unfolded the letter and began to read. Dear Professor Brooks, you probably don't remember how much of a difference you made to me. Most people didn't listen. But you did. You didn't just teach business. You taught us not to shrink ourselves for the comfort of others. I used to apologize for being in the room. Now, I speak without asking permission. Thank you for showing me that quiet doesn't mean invisible. I'm not afraid anymore. Mina. I folded the letter slowly, my fingertips brushing the ink like it might disappear if I moved too fast. Then I placed it gently inside the front flap of my journal and closed it. As I walked to the lecture hall, my chest felt heavy in a different way, not burdened, but full. That afternoon, back home, I walked into the apartment with the kind of ease I hadn't known in months. I kicked off my shoes, let my bag slide onto the couch, and moved toward the windowsill without thinking. That's when I saw it, the cactus. 3 tiny flowers had bloomed, soft pink, barely open, their petals like paper, fragile and alive. I stood there, stunned for a moment. After years of nothing, it had decided to bloom. I reached out and gently touched one of the blossoms, its surface cool beneath my fingertip. A tear welled up, then slipped free, not because I was sad, but because it bloomed anyway. Later that week, I stood backstage at a public entrepreneurship panel hosted by the university. This time, I wasn't in the back row or taking notes from a distance. I was one of the featured speakers. A volunteer clipped a mic to my lapel. The event chair gave a short intro at the podium. We all know her as Gray, he said, but today we honor her as Zephira, a leader, a builder, and someone who chose to rise without burning the world down. He motioned for me to step forward. There it was again. My name, not hidden behind a pseudonym, not whispered by accident. Mine, said out loud, in a room full of people who weren't pretending anymore. I walked to the center of the stage, the spotlight catching the edge of my blazer. At my seat on the panel table was a simple white card with black lettering. Professor Zephira Brooks, panelist. I took my place in the center seat, not off to the side, not behind anyone, center. The questions were thoughtful. The audience leaned in. I shared real stories, ones about late nights spent typing between shifts, about building a client list, one referral at a time, about making mistakes and recovering anyway. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't posture. I told the truth. After the event, people came up to shake my hand. Some asked for advice. Some just said thank you. But what mattered more was how it felt. I wasn't performing anymore. I was just being. That evening, once home and changed out of my heels, I sat on the couch with my laptop open and stared at the blinking cursor in a blank message box. My phone rested nearby, screen still lit with the last text I had received from Isolde months ago. I thought about writing her something sharp, but I didn't want revenge. So I typed, "I don't hate you, but I'm done shrinking for you." I hit send. The word "delivered" popped up. Moments later, "Read." I smiled softly, then swiped left and deleted the thread from my phone. It didn't feel final. It just felt enough. The light coming through the kitchen window was softer than usual, like the day had no need to impress me. I opened my eyes slowly, stretched in bed, and listened. Not for footsteps or voices. There were none, just the hush of a quiet house waking up on its own. I slipped my feet into slippers and made my way to the kitchen. The cactus still sat on the windowsill, in the same small ceramic pot, now wearing 3 delicate blooms like little paper crowns. It hadn't shed a single petal. I took that as a good sign. The kettle began to hum, and I spooned loose tea leaves into a small ceramic cup. No rush, no emails blinking red, no need to prove anything. I didn't even open the laptop right away. I just sat there with my tea, the flowers, and the stillness. When I finally did check my inbox, there were questions from students. Polite, curious, thoughtful, not desperate. They didn't need me to rescue them. They just needed guidance. That was the difference between the old days and now. I wasn't anyone's afterthought anymore. I wasn't just showing up. I was being invited in. The mentorship program had grown slowly over the last year. I didn't advertise it. No hashtags, no glossy brochures. It was all word of mouth. One student told another, who told a friend. We offered workshops, one-on-one coaching, resume reviews, practical things for people trying to build something real. Someone recently called me the quiet architect in an article. It made me laugh out loud when I read it, sitting barefoot on the porch, sipping coffee. It was accurate, I suppose. I had built something, just not the kind of monument you put your name on in lights. Mine was made of late nights, open ears, long pauses before speaking, and truths whispered when the room wasn't looking. And now, people listened. I wasn't famous. I didn't want to be. But I had earned a place in the story. Isolde, as far as I knew, had moved back to Raleigh. I heard from someone that she was teaching SAT prep in a suburban tutoring center. Not exactly glamorous, but steady. Rumor said she rarely showed up at alumni events anymore. Not since the gala. She never sent an apology. I never expected one. What would she even say? I'm sorry I erased you on purpose? Sorry I needed to be bigger than you, even when it wasn't true? Some things don't fit into neat apologies. But one afternoon, my mother emailed me an old photo she said she found in the attic. It was from a Thanksgiving dinner when we were teenagers. In the picture, Isolde was holding a pie, smiling at the camera. And next to her, just slightly out of frame, was me. In the original version, that half of the photo had been cropped. I remembered seeing the smaller, edited one framed in my parents' hallway for years. But this was the full picture, no cuts. At the bottom of the email, my mom wrote, I should have left it like this the first time. It didn't say everything, but it said enough. Weeks later, I was invited to speak at the local library for National Women's Day. It was a small event, folding chairs, homemade cookies, and people who wanted to hear real stories, not polished presentations. When it was my turn to read, I didn't bring a printed speech. I brought Mina's letter. I stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and let the room settle. Then I read, You didn't just teach me business. You taught me not to apologize for existing. I closed the page gently, looked up, and let the silence hold. Some of us, I said, are not loud, but we are impossible to erase. The applause was soft, but it had weight. It didn't fill the room. It settled in it. Afterward, a few women approached me, each sharing pieces of their own silence. Stories of sisters, mothers, daughters, jobs they left, versions of themselves they were still trying to reclaim. One of them said, Thank you for making space for people like us. I didn't cry, I just nodded, then stepped outside, where the sun had just begun to dip below the rooftops. I walked home through the quiet streets of Asheville. The sidewalks were lined with flower beds, the occasional bike leaned against a fence, the scent of dinner from a nearby open window, life moving forward. I passed a store window displaying a new book titled Owning Quiet. Funny how themes echo themselves when you stop forcing them. I didn't look back, not at the library, not at the people still mingling, not at the younger version of me I'd finally let go of. My shoes tapped against the pavement with a calm rhythm, and I breathed deeply into the dusk. I never needed her to shrink. I just needed room to expand. Sometimes the people who silence us the most share our last name, but truth has its own quiet power, and when it finally speaks, it doesn't need permission. Have you ever been underestimated by your own family? How did you find your voice again? If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. More powerful family stories are coming your way because sometimes the ones we survive are the ones worth telling.